Let's talk generations. I think that the oldest generation here, is there anybody here over 95? Okay, I didn't think. Not you, Methuselah. All right, so the oldest generation here is probably the silent generation. And the silent generation were children of the Great Depression, whose parents really had their highlight in the Roaring 20s. People in the silent generation, the youngest of which is 75, the oldest of which is 95. That's a good chunk of you. And one of the interesting things about the silent generation is that they faced great economic hardship in their lives. Before reaching even their teens, they saw their parents deal with World War II. Many lost a father or an older sibling. That is the silent generation. I want to show you a little bit of fashion from the silent generation from that period. Go ahead and pull up that first picture for me, Grant. Yes, indeed. Ladies, you had it together. I do confess that from this point on, in terms of fashion, we will be going downhill. This is about the apex of it. This is nice. Shoulder pads that weren't those awful 90s shoulder pads, and the suits and hats. I like it. That's the silent generation. If you're a part of the silent generation, raise your hand for me. Silent generation, 75 to 95. Okay, it's a couple of you. Cool. After the silent generation, of course, came the baby boomer generation. Baby boomers, that's from 1946 to 1964. They were born during that time. The youngest boomer is 56. The oldest, I believe, is 65. Let me look at it's 74. The oldest is 74. As a group, the baby boomers were wealthier than any generation before them. They were more physically fit than any generation before them. They were more active than any generation before them. And they were considered the first generation to grow up in a world that genuinely seemed to be improving. Boomers grew up at a time also of dramatic social change. In the United States, during their era, so to speak, there was the beginning kind of the polarization that we call conservative and liberal. It really began to show up in the youth and in the young adulthood of the boomer generation. And boomers are notoriously religious. Y'all love the Lord. Amen. Let's look at some fashion of the boomers. Go ahead with that next picture. You look all right, boomers. A little baggy, but I'll take it. You could have tailored this suit leg a little tight, but that's all right. Those are the boomers. If you're a boomer, raise your hand. Let me see who the boomers are. Yeah, I knew we had some boomers in the house. Wonderful, wonderful. After the baby boomers came Generation X, or what's also known as the baby bust. Generation X is from 1965 to 1979. People born in there. The youngest of the Xers are 41. The oldest is 55. Generation Xers were the children that were children during a time of shifting societal values. And as children, sometimes they were called the latchkey generation because mothers went to work and fathers also went to work. And so they were at home alone, kind of having to take care of themselves. And due to this reduced adult supervision, as children, compared to their previous generations, there were a lot more programs that became available for young people to participate in. This was also a time where we saw spikes in divorces, right? Families weren't staying together the way they used to. And there was a lot of preparation for girls to go into the workforce. As adolescents and young adults, this generation was called the MTV generation. Where are the Generation Xers? It should be one or two of you. Also, the Chiagis are probably Xers. The Smiths who are teaching the kids, they're probably Xers. The Wakeleys are probably Xers. Welcome, Xers. Good to see you. Pull up a picture from the Xers. Now, Xers. Now you know good and well, Jesus did not go to Calvary and hang on a cross for y'all to come out wearing this mismatched tablecloth that this lady has on. This is a disaster. Oh, I told you we were going to go downhill from the silent generation, y'all. After the Xers comes the best generation, that would be mine, the millennials. The millennial generation are people born between 1980 and 1994. The youngest millennial is the age of 26. The oldest millennial is the age of 40. Millennials are sometimes known as echo boomers because of the major surge in their birth rates in the 1980s and 90s, and because millennials are often the children of the baby boomers. The characteristics of millennials vary by region and by group experience, but they're generally marked by the coming of age in the time of technology. Millennials are kind of weird because, unlike the generation before us, we were young when technology really began to take off, but unlike the generation after us, we also remember a time when you went outside and played with rocks and sticks and climbed trees. They're comfortable in their use of digital technology. Millennials have a large sense of fairness, equality, but also entitlement. That is the millennials. Let's look at what millennials were wearing in the early 90s. This is, okay. All right, well, you know, listen, at least we're nice. Millennials are nice. After us is Generation Z. Those are people born between 1995 and 2012. The youngest Generation Z person is the age of 8. That would be Jacob. That would be our Aaliyah. That would be our younger people, the oldest of which is 25. The children of Generation Z are weird because they are the children of Xers, of millennials, and of baby boomers, right? Some of them have parents that are as old as 55, and some of them have parents as old as, 26. They have only ever known digital technology. That is how they've grown up. Also, one thing that's really interesting about the Generation Z kids is that they were greatly impacted by the results of 9/11, right? A lot of things changed in the world because of that, but they don't have that experience. They weren't cognizant of that when it happened, whereas the generations before them, we all remember where we were when that happened. And so that's an interesting thing about them. What's interesting is that the Generation Z community are considered by The Economist as the most loyal, the most compassionate, the most thoughtful, the most open-minded, the most educated, or they will be the most educated, the most well-behaved, but also the most depressed generation that we've seen. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that, I just found that mind-blowing. So that's Generation Z. Let's look at Generation Z's clothes. Generation Z knows about the skinny jean. You see how they're very, very tight. I actually don't think this looks so bad, but anyway, that's Generation Z. And then, of course, what's after them is Generation Alpha, and we don't know nothing about them. Jesus may have come back by the time we start talking about Generation Alpha. Whatever generation you fit in, I just want to know, from your perspective, what was a trend of your generation that was horrible? It was just bad, that you are glad to see let go, but that you remember that maybe another generation wouldn't identify with. Let's start with the silent generation, 75 to 95. Papa Evans, what's a trend that you remember from back in your day? Can be a fashion trend, a technology trend. What's something that everybody was doing back in your day?
Well, I wasn't doing too much. Right that day, the Korean War was going.
Okay.
Which I was a part of.
Okay.
Different things, construction, building new highways like the I-81 from here to over the hill to bring over there.
Okay.
I remember, matter of fact, I worked on that freeway. Bridge coming in, it's a reconstruction, highway construction company come out of Oregon to build that highway across there.
So a lot of construction.
And 9 below zero, where they're going up into those mountains up there. They had
Oh no, I wasn't gonna work on nothing.
garbage trucks with brand new tires on them, and they took us up in the mountains. I couldn't nothing else get up in there.
See, it had to be your generation because millennials, we have entitlement. You want me to work in what kind of weather? What kind of conversation? Boomers. What's a trend that you remember from when you were a younger person? Yes, Ms. B.
I remember very vividly the Second World War.
Okay.
Because I was 5 or 6, somewhere around there. And I can remember my brother's wife. Women worked in Washington State. I saw a lot of those. I went up to see them one time, and they got to go up with my mom. But the women did all the work.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
The men were gone.
That's right.
They had to do work during the day and have their children during the night, and they were always tired.
That's exactly right. That's actually around the time that KFC was started. This is just such an example of why perfect timing really works. Because the women had to go to work, these families were used to a hot meal at home for dinner, and the colonel said, well, boy, I'll put a piece of chicken in a bucket and a mashed potato. He made a business that like outlived him, outgrew him, and it's just amazing because if he had done that at any other time, it wouldn't have worked. Timing is everything. Let's talk about, I want to see the Xers. Xers, that's the 55. Debbie, that's your people. Yes, tell me a trend. What's something that y'all were doing?
The horrible fashions of the 80s.
Tell me about one.
Oh, just like side collars and bright colors and mismatched horrible things and lots of hairspray to do things that hair should not ever do.
Yes, indeed. David.
Go over to Chuck E. Cheese and watch MTV on the big screen.
Okay.
Videos.
They were letting the babies in Chuck E. Cheese watch the MTV. Lord. See, that's why my kids can't go to Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah. Millennials, give us one, Kiara.
Boost mobile phones
Okay.
were really popular, and Gacho pants. You remember
What are gacho pants?
those? They were really loose pants for girls, and like they would flare at the bottom.
Oh, kind of like bell bottoms. Yeah, bell bottoms is a sin. I really think bell bottoms is a stain on America's history. Here's where I'm going with this, folks. Here's where I'm going with this. Whether we talk about bell bottoms, whether we talk about oat bran, whether we talk about heavy metal, whether we talk about hot yoga. I did a deep dive on some of y'all Facebook pages too. I was kind to not bring up those pictures. I thought about it. We've all taken part in trends, right? In fads. We've seen them come and we've seen them go. We've done some stuff that seems super superficial and embarrassing. Again, I've been on some of your Facebook pages. And even when we think about trends beyond just like fashion, political movements, when we think about meditation practices, when we think about healthcare practices, this is the new healthy diet, this is the new thing to eat, this is the new thing to do. And I think that fads are appealing in a universal kind of way because we all have this urge to be in the know, right? To be a part of the it crowd, to do something that's fresh and that's new. And listen, I'm not shaming anybody for that. Sometimes there are real good motivations behind a fad. Listen, if you're a little overweight, try the keto, see what happens. It might not be a bad thing. Trying to find a new spin on an old thing can be really helpful, but one thing that we're positive about that history has shown us is that fads pass, right? Trends pass. Andy Warhol's famous statement about 15 minutes of fame is a generously long estimation of our appetite for fashion and for health trends and for music and for gadgets and for any number of things. And I share this all with you because in the Bible, in the scripture that we're going to kind of unpack this morning, Paul faced this as he addressed this church in Corinth. The Corinthians were enslaved to trends. New philosophers, new religions, new cults came into town every week there, and everybody was always trying to be a part of this in crowd and follow this new thing. And I think to fully understand Paul's letter to the Corinthian church, you really have to understand Corinth. If you're from the U.S., probably the first time that you ever heard the word Corinth mentioned in modern culture outside of the church was probably about 30 years ago. This is before I was born. But there's a man named Ricardo Montalban. Am I saying that right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Who? And what did he say in that commercial? He would say, "Is this Corinthian leather?" As he sat, like he would be in a car, like in a Chrysler, advertising it. Is this Corinthian leather? And for a lot of you, that was probably the first time that you had heard the word Corinthian outside of a church context. And on the commercial, it meant upper class. It meant high quality. But in the ancient world, Corinthian was hardly a compliment. It was almost an insult. And so today, we're going to look at the first part of Paul's letter to this young church. And we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at the cliques that he is noting, that he is mentioning, that he is aware of. We're going to look at the cross, right? And how baffling the news of the gospel is in this society in Corinth. And we're also going to look at the community. We're going to see Paul's vision for the solution, for the universal problem of being a Corinthian. And I pray that it encourages you. Let's talk to God this morning. Father, in Jesus' name, bless us. Speak richly to us, God. Our ears are open. Our hearts are open, God. Our mind is open, God. We want to hear exactly what it is that you want to share with us. Nothing more, nothing less. So hover in this place. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to read 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 18 through 31. Again, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 31. It says this: "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were noble of birth, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and despised things and things that are not, to nullify things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of him you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us the wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. That's a lot of scripture, but it's important scripture. I want to tell you about Corinth. I've been to Corinth. Kiara and I had an opportunity to walk through Corinth last year in Greece. Corinth is a city not far from Athens. It's on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. And unlike Athens, its stately neighbor, Corinth was a young city in Paul's day. And today, you know, people get excited. I'm going to the ancient city of Corinth. But in Paul's day, it was a young city. It had been built on literally smoking ruins just a few generations before Paul's time. So the wealth of Corinth was new. The culture of Corinth was new. The people of Corinth didn't have much heritage. They didn't have this long history. And to make things more interesting, Corinth was a port city. And tradesmen from all over the known world came to bring their goods, and with them came new ideas and new beliefs. So what that meant was that you could find almost anything you were looking for in Corinth. anything that you wanted, you could find all kind of different discussions, any kind of argument. You could make and lose money very quickly in Corinth. You could become a millionaire in a couple days if you played your cards right in Corinth. And there was no such thing as a landed aristocracy of old money in this young city. See, some places you go and that's old money. You know, you meet folks and this is old money. The Corinth didn't have old money. Everything in Corinth was new. So what that meant was that your status wasn't determined by your heritage. It was determined by how well you played your cards. It was determined by the money that you made while you were there. And with that money, you could buy your way in and out of different points of view, in and out of different circles, in and out of whatever appealed to you at the time. And so you have this very young city, a busy city, a city with a lot of money that's new money, a transient city. And so let's just say that the morals of Corinth will be nice, progressive. You could find whatever floated your boat in Corinth. Promiscuity, drunkenness, general licentious living were a part of the normality of Corinth. Think about whatever you think the worst city is, wherever you think the devil just sits and dwells and posts up today, that's Corinth. In the ancient world, the slur for wild, reckless partying, the slur for being promiscuous, the slur for behaving in ways that are inappropriate, that are disgusting, was to say you have been Corinthicized. When you acted up, if she came outside and the skirt was too short, ooh, child, she looked like a Corinthian. If he was loose and sleeping around, ooh, that's a Corinthian man. And the reality was that because it was a port city, what happened in Corinth stayed in Corinth. You think Vegas has something. The Corinthian lifestyle was wild and irresponsible and fun for a night. But in the morning, when the hangover came, when the squabbling came, when the backbiting came, you realize that Corinth isn't as fun as I thought it was. And so the fads that we talked about earlier were alive and were well in Corinth. The latest of everything came there. And this is good stuff too. The good, the bad, the ugly. It all came there. The most educated people made their way in and then out of Corinth. Also, the worst kinds of people made their way in and out of Corinth. And this translated also into religion, into faith. And it is in the midst of this kind of melting pot of a whole lot that Paul's crazy behind decides, I'm going to plant a church. It is like going to Las Vegas. On one corner is the strip club, on the other corner is the casino, on this corner is the bar, on this corner is Skid Row. And on the remaining corner, I say, we're going to plant us a good church here. This is a good place to have good church here. We're going to find all the Christians here. This is literally what Paul does. The issue with the church that he planted there is that it became obsessed with the wisdom that Paul keeps talking about in his letters. And as a result, they have started to split off into different cliques, each trying to be more exclusive than the next. I'm going to put this in my pocket. Paul decides to address this issue in the Corinthian church in his letter. He says this. He says, what I mean is this. One of you says, I follow Paul. The other says, I follow Apollos. Another says, I follow Cephas. Still another says, I follow Christ. Paul asked them, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? Paul is chastising them. You follow Apollos. Well, we follow the real God. We follow Paul. And Paul is saying, you follow Paul, that's nothing. We follow Jesus. The cliques that are cropping up all over the place, the Corinthian people are treating the gospel like any other fad or trend or get-rich-quick scheme that came through town. The good news of the gospel is being chewed up and digested like a trend. And they're all trying to get this great new wisdom that this great smart teacher has brought into town. Whatever that is, I just want a seat at the insider's table. Whatever it is, I just want to be with the best of the best. And as crazy as that sounds, so many of us look at Christianity like that today. We participate in Christianity because we want to be a part of the best, the latest, the newest, the thing that feels, the most right, instead of just out of a genuine love for Jesus, this Jesus that we meet, this Jesus that we've experienced. I don't want you to come to church just because it's the popular, and maybe it's not as popular now, but because it's something that you are particularly that you've just grabbed hold of just to grab hold of it. It has to be about Jesus, because what we see is that divisions and cliques constantly plague humanity. And I mean, today all you have to do is watch 5 minutes of TV and you'll see all kind of advertisements that say things like first to do and first to wear and wearing the latest, and we know you're not like the others, come here, and we know that you're making the best choice, so buy this. If a company really wants to expand how much they're going to sell of a product, they use words like exclusive and limited edition. I love Paul because Paul says, I'm not having any of that. I'm not having any of that, and neither should we. He sees this kind of one-upmanship, this competitive spirit, as exactly what it is, a symptom of sin. And what's his answer to everyone's insider knowledge and exclusive wisdom and refined sophistication? He says, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. I want to talk for a few minutes about the cross. And I want to back up a few verses. I want to read 1 Corinthians just 18 and 19. 1 Corinthians 1, 18 and 19. Again, it says, for the message of the cross was foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. The cross was a shameful way to die. I mean, shameful. In that society, it was reserved for runaway slaves. It was reserved for political insurrectionists. It was reserved for terrorists. These were not just people that the authorities wanted dead. These were people that the authorities wanted to make an example of and put on display. You better not do this, or else this is what's going to happen to you. This is the forerunner to lynching. The idea of a cross being placed as a piece of jewelry, as something that somebody would be proud to wear for this society, was insane. It was the equivalent of walking in here with like a noose on. Like that's how crazy it was. It was the equivalent of walking around carrying an electric chair saying, look at what we are a part of. It was crazy. As far as political movements go, see, we know the whole story, at least as much of it that we know. And so we celebrate Jesus and we think of Jesus as our hero, and he is. But in this time, again, as political movements went, Jesus was a failure, like the other rebels before him. As far as becoming a pop culture icon, as far as becoming a philosopher, he was a failure. As far as becoming this military genius that the Jewish people hoped he would be, our hero, our conqueror, the one who will lead us out of the pain and the oppression we're experiencing, he was a failure. By any of our measures, the cross was a disaster. I mean, a disaster. He dies on a cross publicly, as well as most of his students. Literally, the message of the cross is foolishness. And that's exactly why it worked. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25, it says, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." God played the fool in Christ. He chose the way of humiliation and love, and not in a watered down kind of abstract or arbitrary way, but like very literally. Again, think about if somebody came in and said, "Oh, my hero was hung, and this noose is the symbol of our hope in him." Huh? That wouldn't work. And instead of being exclusive, instead of trying to be the smartest guy in the room, instead of trying to be the most powerful, instead of trying to be the conqueror, instead of trying to be the victorious, he chose the road of the fool. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 and 28. "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are." Here is a group of people in Corinth looking for the most sophisticated, complex answer they can find. And Paul says that the low and despised answer is the right one, rather than the flashy fad coming into town. Rather than some conquering philosophy or new God, this God conquered on the cross. And the reality is, for this community, even the substance of the answer of the gospel seems foolish. This isn't some castle of philosophical inferences or abstract choices or arbitrary chains of logic. This gospel is the bizarre story of state execution and a body that somehow came back from the dead. That's what the gospel is about. State execution and a body that somehow came back from the dead. This also, though, isn't some wild, brain-numbing ceremony to curry favor with far-off gods. Some people thought, oh, this is some type of sacrifice that's going to carry favor with God. No, the gospel is the transformative message that presses you into life rather than giving you an escape from it. When you think about the gospel in that light, that helps you not to be as rattled by the things that life brings. When you recognize, again, the gospel is to press you into life, not to give you an escape from it. So let's translate that into our own time, where fashions and trends and philosophies go by even faster because of technology and social media. I want to be clear that the gospel is not vague, and it is not sentimental. It's not this feel-good philosophy that doesn't demand anything. That's why it is not enough to just say Jesus was a good person. It's not enough to just say, oh, he was this great prophet and a good teacher, and I like some of the ideals of Christianity. No, because it demands something. The gospel is not Dr. Phil's latest takeover, we're going to fix you. I like Dr. Phil, so I'm not going to talk about him too bad. The gospel is not a mathematical formula that you can put on a spreadsheet to fix all your problems, to answer all your questions, to make things easier for you. The gospel is a really weird story. That's where it starts. It's a weird story based on weirder circumstances that just won't go away. A weird story that started in a small corner in Israel and somehow translated itself to every language, to every corner of the earth, to every color of person, to every economic tax bracket, to everywhere, and won't go away. And the answer isn't in power or secret knowledge or sudden wealth. The answer is the oldest answer in the book: love. That's what's at the heart of the gospel. Or as Paul said, he said, now I will show you the most excellent way. Y'all still with me? All right, wake up, wake up, wake up. I'm almost done. I'm almost done. I want to talk for a moment about the community that we see in this Corinthian text. The clicks appear and everyone is trying to get further in with the in crowd. And the cross and the resurrection breaks these ancient rules of human selfishness, really, so that it breaks the rules of life and death and time and space. That's what the cross and the resurrection do. And the answer to this fractured group in Corinth that the cross brings is community. Just as breaking off in factions is a symptom of sin and selfishness, so then must mean that community is the answer, that God is present and in charge. I'm going to say that again. If we believe that factions, that separation, that racism, that division, that sexism, that poverty, if we believe that all of these things are symptoms of sin, then we must also therefore believe that community is a symptom of God being present and in charge. And I think we see this only in moments in this life when everyone in the room is celebrated, is seen, is loved, when no one is trying to be better than anyone else, when nobody has more power than anybody else, when nobody is trying to win or be the center of attention, when everybody can be seen and celebrated and loved. One great example of this, really quick, is the life of Henry Nouwen. He was a priest and a writer and a professor and just a brilliant mind, brilliant mind. And he wrote a lot of the spiritual classics that are taught at the most sophisticated institutions. I mean, I'm talking about Harvard and Yale and Brown. But he finally found this home at, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, I'll probably mispronounce it, but at this place called the Lark Community, something like that. It was a residential, L'Arche. L'Arche? We'll go with it. YouTube, if they're wrong, it's their fault. This community was, it was a residential community for those with mental and developmental disabilities. And he lived there and he worked there for the last 10 years of his life, where he found the community of love that he had sought for decades. I want to read to you what he said about this place. He said, "I also realized that the handicapped people didn't love or care for me because I write books or take trips. They didn't know that. If they express love, it comes from God. When I came to the L'Arche community, my whole life was tired. But God said, I love you and I want to hold you. And finally, God had that chance to really hug me and lay divine hands onto my heart through this community." That's from his book called The Road to Peace, if you ever want to read it. It's a good book. Nouwen had been on the inside of the in crowd, in the most sophisticated rooms, in the rooms with the most brilliant theologians. And what people don't realize is that the field of theology often parallels the field of philosophy. So you're with brilliant minds outside of your field. The people who are going to probably end up supervising my research are experts actually in Islamic studies. Because in this world, you're with the smartest from every kind of corner. He had spoken before thousands and thousands of people internationally. He was renowned, still is. And where he finally found peace, where he finally found Jesus, was in the company of folks without the mental capacity to appreciate how smart he was, how intelligent he was, how successful he was, how skilled he was. People who would have been called fools hundreds of years ago. They didn't care about his amazing career. They didn't care about what he could do for them. They didn't care about what he could provide for them. And some of us miss the mark because we say, well, I don't care about how smart you are either. But there is something that you care about that you have esteemed in your life as the metric for success. And you have to look at what that is for yourself. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's how well you serve. Maybe it's how nice you are. Maybe it's how committed you are. Maybe it's how disciplined you are. Maybe it is how much money you make or how successful you are or how well you save. Maybe it's, I don't know, any number of things, how well you parent or grandparent. But the reality is, I want us to get to a place where we get to experience being loved just because we're loved. And what that'll do for us is allow us to love just because we love. I was talking earlier today about this community that Barbara's in this kind of nursing home facility. And the thing that's so interesting to me about them is that they have built this community among each other, all kinds of different people, all kinds of different colors, all kinds of different lives. And the interesting thing is, I think one of the reasons that they've built this community is because when we ask them, Barbara takes me around and introduces me to all kinds of people. And when we talk to them, the one thing that I hear more than anything else is, I'm lonely and my family doesn't come to visit. And what I've learned is that the places where community is deepest is often the places where people are shunned. Leper communities were rich communities, biblically. And I want to get to a place where we can build community not because we're shunned, but because God is present and in charge. So here's one true community that we're in right now. One of the signs of that is that one of the signs that this is community is that God is present. This church, this is going to be the community of the one who in his crowning moment washed feet. The apex of his career was kneeling down, washing feet. I want this to be the community of the one whose kingdom wasn't up on the latest trend, whose crown was literally made of thorns. And wherever that God is, all are celebrated. No one is excluded. Nobody is in some special clique. When Jesus is here, everyone is blessed. So we talked about the cliques today. And how Paul's letter was to a church that was dividing up into factions, following certain leaders, and their sinful behavior came out in a religious guise. And I want us to really be careful to make sure that our worldliness, bad behavior doesn't ever hide behind the guise of spirituality or religion. We talked about the cross. Have you ever been scandalized by the cross? I mean, like really scandalized by it. Has Jesus ever used people that you just would never suspect? Circumstances that don't make sense to deliver us, to draw us deeper into himself? I think about verse 9 from this text, the things that are not to nullify the things that are. And we talked today about the community. We talked about who we are. Look around you. Would you have chosen this? I mean, look at you two sitting here. Would you have chosen each other to be in community with? I don't know that you would have. I don't know that you would have. If the Spirit hadn't brought us together, if the Spirit hadn't brought the church together, the church that we know today is the result of a whole lot of fighting and wars and pain and problems. They went through a lot so that miracles could still endure. So I want to end this morning just by reading Paul's discussion of the most excellent way in 1 Corinthians 13. As much as these words are read mostly at weddings. I've done several weddings now, and this is always people want. Read 1 Corinthians 13. I think that they describe God and help us to see what true community can really look like and will look like when Jesus is in the room. So I'm going to read it. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 13. And I just encourage you to close your eyes and hear these words, because they can do a better job of ministering this than I ever could. It says this: if I speak in the tongues of men or angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Father, in Jesus' name, settle that into our hearts, God. That we are to be a loving community, not just within the walls of the church, but outside of it. Not just including Christians, but including all kinds of folks from all kinds of different places who do all kinds of different things. And we are to love them, not in a watery way, not in a weak way, not in an arbitrary way, great God, but in a way that busts down doors, that fights, that climbs, that makes ways the way you did when you hung on a cross, when your greatest display for us was nails going through your arm. God, that's love. Help us to be that community. In Jesus' name, amen.